we are gathered at the Nickel Valley Theater, post-secondary institute that was started by the 5 local bands in 1983. And this building was constructed in 2002, so I feel really honored that we can host this event with the candidates with this current election. We'll know the results on Saturday. So we have 2 candidates. We have Jonah. He resides in Lillooet and he's running for the Green Party. And we also have Francyne, who is from the Merritt area, born and raised here, and is with the Shackan band member. So we're going to have a question and answer period.
Where's our third candidate?
Oh yes, our third candidate, Tony Lack, has declined the invitation, stated that he had other commitments, so he was unable to attend.
I have found during campaigning, being able to listen to other people's ideas is so much what this is meant to be. And coming from emergency management, I've been now trying to share, okay, this is how our organization, which comes from a First Nations perspective, wants to work with communities. So now Lenny wants to also work more closely together with First Nations Forestry Council, and I've now also reached out to the BC Cattlemen's Association. And that comes from part of my background too. This is the area I come with. So now Kenny Boone from BC Cattlemen's wants to talk about drought management and emergency management practices. And Lenny and I were talking about, when the trees burn, what can we do together to make sure the community is safe, and looking at the revenue production there too. So it's been a learning experience. So no matter what happens, there's going to be definitely relationships built.
And the, what is it called? Somebody help me. It's like First Nations working with prior firemen managing
Cultural
the land.
burning. Cultural and prescribed burning.
Yeah. I think that's a really important thing that needs to be, if it hasn't been looked at, seriously looked at and implemented as soon as possible, if that's not happening yet. I've been hearing about it over and over, and I remember as a child, my father took care of the land. Every spring he would do the burns, and he burned the fields, he raised cattle, we had garden, and we had, forest around us, but mostly dry, kind of sagebrush stuff that would really burn like crazy if we ever did have a fire there. And all the years I remember, we didn't have fire. But in the last few years, my family still has between Spence's Bridge and Ashcroft, just where we're from, on the opposite side of the highway. And my older sister and her husband have had a certified organic farm, and our property is isolated. There's no electricity up there. We grew up without it, and we had a house fire. Actually, our house burned down, but in the last few years, there's been fires that have been started from the railroad tracks up onto the plateau, and onto their gardens. They've lost a lot of their gardens due to fire. So, anyway, that's just one little thing that I really believe is important.
Great.
Well, maybe not little, I should say big, right?
Yeah, that is that's a big concern for a lot of people in the riding. We have Lytton in this riding. I'm a homeowner in Lillooet, and every year I'm worried, is my house going to burn down this year? And a lot of people we don't call it summer anymore. We call it either smoke season or fire season, and it causes a lot of concerns, especially when you have fires in the riding, big fires every year. We had Spence's Bridge this year with Shetland Creek. Lytton has fires almost every year now. And so one thing that the BC Greens want to do is we want to provide more funding for communities to ensure that they're taking part in prescribed burns or cultural burns. We want to get First Nations people again, making those decisions on the land base about how it's managed. So whether that's doing a cultural burn, or whether, how are we also not only fire but flooding along our rivers as well. And we need to make sure that we're investing in infrastructure for our communities to ensure that they are flood proof as well. And some of the communities in our riding do already have systems of dikes and things like that, but they aren't being well managed by the province right now. And I feel like that needs to be addressed as well. And so, again, like we've had fires and floods, and I often say our riding is on the front lines of climate change. And that means that our riding really needs to be stood up in the legislature, and we need a loud voice for these rural communities in our riding in Victoria, and fighting for all of us together, because it comes back to making sure that our communities are safe and healthy, and they're places that people want to live and where they see themselves raising a family and retiring and living. And part of that is making sure that our communities are safe from the effects of climate change, like fires. And so that's really important. And also, like, it's important to be reducing those fuels on the land base, because, like, I have a 6-month daughter at home, and thankfully it wasn't a very smoky year this year, but we have increasing rates of respiratory illnesses with children who are born and raised in summers where it's very smoky. We have increasing rates of asthma. And again, if we want healthy kids, we need to start thinking about these impacts to our health and our communities in a more holistic manner. And I think part of that includes prescribed and cultural burns on the land base. We need to make sure that either BC Wildfire is doing that, or that we're working with local First Nations to do that on the land, because that is in my opinion, that's one of the best ways to reduce wildfire risk for our communities.
That's very holistic. The holistic part I can see as you're speaking is like the controlled fire burns, taking care of the land, preparing for those summers that are coming, hot summers, and the forestry and the logging. It's all connected, and you then follow the floods. If you're not taking care of that original land, doing the burns, we're going to get fires. After fires, what comes? If the land is decimated, the trees are gone. After logging, rain, floods. Of course, that's going to happen, the floods. So it's like there's a cycle that's happening. So
And if it isn't floods, it's drought. We've had
Yeah,
terrible
we're
amounts of
definitely in
drought,
drought.
right? And
Yeah.
so the other thing the BC Greens want to institute in watersheds is watershed security councils. So these are groups of locals, First Nations, local food producers, municipalities, so that we can all talk in the same room and start thinking about how do we manage our water together better, instead of having it kind of dictated from someone in Vernon or Victoria or Kamloops.
Who has no idea about our rural
Exactly.
situations there. And I mean, I think that's why it's also so important to be inclusive of DRIPA, because that's my biggest concern, is that with a conservative government, if they start to dismantle DRIPA in any ways, they're not going to be supportive of a large community that's part of British Columbia, especially in this riding. And I think we've been making some really good steps to include First Nations and Métis peoples, understanding that the traditional practices that have been used, and they've been shared with ranchers, and they've been shared with the people who have grown up in this community for so long. Fires can be healthy, but really hot fires, like what we've had over the past few years, are far too dangerous, and they affect our homes, the insurance we pay on our homes, our families when they're displaced, the tourism. So I do believe, similar to what Jonah said, we have to take charge, and we have to do it collaboratively. Otherwise, we're just at the mercy of Mother Nature, and we need to work with Mother Nature too. First Nations Emergency Services has been doing a lot of training, but this is the type of organization we need to continue to support. When we started this year, the province was 20% drier, like at 20% moisture levels in the grounds. So we were behind the 8 ball at the very beginning. And some of our First Nations were prepared, like Nikomin. When the Lifton fire came, Nikomin had already done the fires. They'd done the prescribed fires, so they were better prepared. But we can still do a lot more working with the communities.
What's it about person?
Another question I have about forestry too is every time I'm going through the Coquihalla and seeing all the damaged, healthy trees now. They were healthy, but now they're damaged by the, I think they're this, it's a spruce beetle. And you don't hear anything about it in the media. And I'm really saddened by looking at the trees because they're all red, you know.
They're dying,
Yeah.
Or gray.
Exactly.
And I have not heard anything or seen anything in the media about it, so I'm not too sure what the plans are there.
Mm-hmm.
If there are any plans, I don't know whether, I wanted to talk to some people about it, but I haven't had a chance to because there's like no forum for us to, bring up those types of questions or comments.
And I think no matter what happens with this election, and especially, I know it could, what if we're a conservative government but with a Green Party MLA? It's the responsibility of whoever is MLA to be the voice of the community. You can't be sitting back saying, it's not their job or something. You need to continue to advocate for the people here. And I think Jackie's done a good job, but we still need to have concerns brought. If you start to find yourself wavering, life happens sometimes, and you need to have a succession plan to pass on the role of working for this community. So I haven't also heard anything about the spruce beetle. It was always the pine beetle. So if that's the concerns that are happening in this riding, then like you, we need to have forums where we can discuss this. We need to have people who are dealing with it, and are they addressing it or why not? And if we need money, then it comes also to priorities in the riding.
I really haven't seen anything in the media about it. Literally.
Mhm.
I think I probably did a Google search on it, but nothing came up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and one other thing I really think that we need more on the land is land use planning. We need a government that is working with First Nations and municipalities and, in this case, forest licensees to ensure that our forests are being effectively and properly managed. Because, it was something that the NDP really started in the 90s. They did some. We did some around in the Lillooet kind of Squamish area for the Olympics. But for the most part, there's still a lot of the province where there's no plan on how we manage our resources. It's just kind of a forest licensee or a mining company applies to the government and asks, can we do something here? The government, sends out a 30 or 60-day consultation letter to a First Nation, and then they do whatever they were going to do anyways, because, that's kind of what that's despite implementing the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act, a lot of things haven't changed in the world of how do we manage the land base together. And so something that the Greens and myself are fighting for is we need to have an actual plan on how we manage the forests, and how do we manage insect outbreaks, or how do we manage the landscape for forest health instead of just the economics of it, because we can't keep thinking about our forests as a bank. We need to be thinking of it as an ecosystem, because that's what it is. And if we start thinking about our forests as ecosystems, we're going to have better water. We're going to have better ecosystem services. We're going to have more food, and we're going to have better animal populations for people to be able to utilize in the future as well, because that's a big concern for a lot of people as well. The moose and mule deer, we've all seen populations decline, and I think a lot of it is because we don't have a plan The province doesn't have a plan right now for how things like the forests are going to be managed. And so, again, that kind of, you're going to sense a theme in a lot of what I'm saying, but, we do need to have shared decision making. We need to empower First Nations communities to make decisions on their own about how things are done. And so I'm really appreciative some communities are stepping up and they are unilaterally implementing Indigenous protected and conserved areas. You have Kanaka Bar has done one in Kaik. You have some in the Similkameen. You have some in the North Thompson there as well. And I think that's a really powerful tool for First Nations to use to tell not only the province, but companies who want to operate in those areas, like, no, you need to talk to us about utilizing the land. You can't just go talk to the colonial government in Victoria.
No, you can't. But I think NDP's plan basically it's the intent is to work with Indigenous organizations, Indigenous First Nations, and it's so different in this riding because we have the First Nations in the Nicola Valley, the First Nations in the Canyon, and now with the change in boundaries, we now have the Seabird Island group, and the needs are so different down there than what I've ever known. So it's one thing to have a plan, but each plan needs to be customized to the community. So you need to have their input, and sometimes I understand going to some of bands like our own band. We only have so much capacity, so how do we get their input? Whereas somebody like West Bank First Nations, they have a lot bigger financial resource, so they can hire a lot more people. But sometimes those people don't have the history of the territory or nation. So we have to be very careful as we move forward as to who we're asking input from. Sometimes I think people, I guess it's really what's in their heart. And so I think it's really important to have somebody speaking up who's going to listen also. So.
Well, yeah, and then they're talking about, food, salmon, of course, comes in there, since you start talking about, this kind of thing, and then land, you mentioned mines. I would love not to see another mine in our territory. That's a fantasy, I suppose. But my parents and I come from the Highland Valley. That's our traditional territory, that whole thing, Teck. And boy, can I tell you the history of that if you cared to hear it. The true history. I was there. I was a child at that time, maybe 12. And I saw the trauma. We still carry the trauma of what that Teck has done to our traditional world. That was our world, our backyard. We lived there. I played there. I rode horses up there, fished with my family, stayed in a cabin overnight, and other families that are from that territory, relatives. I hadn't seen what they did up there probably for 30 years, and when I came back about 10 years ago and went up there and saw it for the first time, I had to pull all over the side of the road and get out and cry. That's how devastating and traumatic these things are doing to not just our family, our whole communities, all the communities around that have been affected. That's like a whole world. It's like so, I can't find the words, but I would like to see, unrealistic maybe, and what did we get from it? My mom would say, I heard her being interviewed on a video, I think it was in the 80s. And she's like, we never got one penny out of it. The families. There's no per capita or any of that stuff. You know, it's like, you need to hear the elders tell their story about, we have all these young people, all these people that work here and work there for them here and there, and they're like, still trying to get our stories, but it's all tokenism as far as I'm concerned. The decisions have been made. Oh, we want elders' opinion. They don't want opinion, they want to think they've got our opinion, they've already made decisions about what's gonna happen. Those decisions have been made. And that's what's still happening today. You know, it was made 60 years ago or so.
Yeah, I think those agreements need to have a regular review to make sure they're benefiting all the parties. Because I know you do hear from some people saying, oh yeah, we're getting this and this and that. But how do you know, and how does the community know exactly what they're getting? And what I'm hearing a lot about is just really bad communication, promises.
Well, that's a whole nother can of worms. That's like, that's, if anybody can resolve that in the next 50 years, God bless them, and I pray that they can work
Mhm.
some of this out for our people and our children and grandchildren. So that's it. I won't say more.
I have a comment or question slash comment. Comment then question. I'm Aaron Shumahetsa. I was just going to say it's unfortunate that Tony Luck couldn't make it here today. And I know because I think just being from this riding, I think more than 20% of the riding is First Nations, you know, in terms of population, and it would be nice if he was here. And relating to land-related issues, I think, one of the questions I think I generally know what the answers may be, but I would have liked to hear Tony's perspective on it, because it's really clear when it comes to like what's happened in Haida Gwaii and the recent legislation with the Rising Tides title agreement. The Conservatives have said that they're, or at least Rustad has said he's not supportive of he's been wishy-washy, but not title, it sounds like, is not something that he supports. And here in British Columbia, or here in this area, right, as Francyne was saying, we have Nitlagapan people here, we have Stelo people in the riding, we have Shilk people, and
Stutley.
yeah, and I guess that's would be my question, is relating to, I'm familiar with what the party's positions are on relating to title, or relating to like the agreements, the track record, but I am interested in, and I think I already know the answers, but relating to title, right? Like, because sometimes what the party says versus what the constituents say in your writing is an issue, and title. I think the First Nations or the Indigenous nations are here in this riding. I'm sure they have certain things that they want, including control of some of their traditional territories, and I think it goes to the issue that Iona was talking about, and I think for there to be less trauma when there's development on lands, I think Indigenous nations need to be involved in the decision making, right? And hopefully that will transfer to some of the lands being transferred and being managed by the First Nations themselves, right? And hopefully under title. But anyway, so it's unfortunate that Tony Luck couldn't make it here today, because I would have liked to have heard his answer. But I just wanted to kind of follow up on what my mother Iona was talking about over there, in terms of what does the future look like, and what is the I guess, what are the parties going to do in relation to land and First Nations? And I did hear you talk a little bit about the IPCAs already, but yeah, so. But thank you. I'll stop.
Yeah, and sometimes, I think I'm so pleased to be an Indigenous woman sitting up here, but sometimes I feel like the responsibility is even greater being put upon me, because I've already been told, oh yeah, you're Indigenous, all you care about is Indigenous issues. But I mean, from the Indigenous community, sometimes it comes down to, well, you're from the Enklakapam, what about us? But so I do feel more responsibility to be inclusive in consulting with them. I don't want to be in a position where I'm tokenized either. So, and that's where, I mean, I've personally said in previous forums, it's so important to have a voice at these tables. And it's not just my own voice, but it's coming from the community. Because the NDP have 7 Indigenous candidates running, and out of 93, even if you had all 7 Indigenous candidates, it's not enough of a voice in this province. So we all need to make sure, and David Eby and the NDP, I think, have been pretty consistent with consulting the First Nations communities, and they've been great with DRIPA and moving forward. The legislation that has been passed before us, needs to be reviewed, but I do feel that we all as parties need to continue monitoring what's happening in the government. And as MLAs, it's important for us to be representative of all the demographics, all the voters, all of our community members, because I know that whenever I've ever come back home to the Nicola Valley, I've been asked, sort of, what have you done for us? But they're just as supportive too. So that's the type of government I know I'm hoping to work for after the election.
Just to respond to your wondering why Tony isn't here, I sent him the invite, and he says, "Good evening, Mandy. Thank you so much for the invite." This is from his from the regional director for Central Interior Columbia, CP BC. Thank you so much for the invite for Tony Luck to the forum. Regrettably, Tony is unavailable for this event as he has attended previously scheduled events throughout the Fraser Valley. If you have any questions that you would like Tony to respond to, we will be happy to take them via email.
Thank you.
We look forward to visiting the campus after the election.
Yeah, I also think it's important to state that title exists, because I don't think all of the parties would agree with that statement. Like you mentioned, Aaron, John Rustad has been he's not sure where he stands on the Rising Tides agreement with Haida, and I read through the Conservative platform, and they're saying they want $10 million for economic reconciliation with First Nations throughout the province. And I looked at that number, I was like, 10 million is awfully small to do anything, but especially with First Nations, thinking about the work that I've done with Indigenous communities in this riding and throughout the region, 10 million is going to get you maybe 10 or 15 First Nations communities. Like, if that's your plan for the whole province, that's essentially nothing. And so, I think it's important, and I think the NDP did a good thing with the Haida, agreeing to title outside of the courtrooms. I think that's where the best agreements are formed, outside of the courts, because if we go to court, both sides, it's an adversarial place. It's not where relationships are built. Relationships are built at the table and out in the field and on the land with each other. And I think that's important to go to those places where title is being talked about, and work with those First Nations communities, and absolutely, like, I've mentioned shared decision making, but definitely there are some places in the province where maybe only Entlakatm should be the decision makers, because they have title in those areas, or only Statlium. And that is something that the Greens really want to move forward on, is working with First Nations communities and nations as a whole on how do we get to a better place, and how do we do more of those, the Haida type agreements as opposed to the Tsilhqot'in type agreements where a court tells us we spend hundreds of millions of dollars on lawyers through the previous conservative-esque government with the BC Liberals. They spent hundreds of millions of dollars on lawyers, and then the courts ended up telling them, no, bonking them on the head and saying, no, you have to go work together anyways. So why don't we skip the expensive part and just come to the table with an open mind and be really honorable and negotiate in good faith with the nations that really have, much of BC is unceded, and that's something that really should be a basic requirement for an elected member anywhere in British Columbia to be able to say that. And I think that the other party that isn't here, I'm not certain that would be supported in that caucus.
Thank you.
I have another
And with
comment.
that, you're gone?
I gotta go. So
I
got
have
kids,
another
sorry.
No,
big
thanks,
concern. Big concern is health, medical, hospitals, emergency, shortage of doctors, nurses. I hear all over people. Somebody in our family knew this weekend had something happen, needed to go to emergency. There was no emergency. So what are we supposed to do? And I think you're hearing this probably all over the province. There's a shortage of healthcare. And I think First Nations communities have some kind of healthcare. I live off the reserve, there's like on the reserve, and they have some nurses and whoever that, I'm not familiar with that, but I also was very upset, and this is very personal, but I'm going to talk about it, that someone I know from one of our communities was basically forced, coerced, First Nations community to go and take a booster shot. Forced. Threatened. If you don't do it, you will not receive our services anymore. I thought we were still living in a democratic society. We bodily autonomy. Choose if we want or not in our own bodies. I think this is terrible, that this is happening to our people. They're being forced. She said, no, I don't want it. I choose not. Well, if that's your choice, then we won't come and take you to your appointments anymore. An elder. We won't have somebody come and clean your floor or somebody help you bath. That's wrong. That is wrong. If it's morally wrong, we have God-given rights. We're born and we can choose what happens to our body. And I think that's something people aren't talking about out there. You're not hearing about it on the mainstream. Very deeply concerned about that. So that's my thoughts on that.
Well, I know COVID was one of the scariest periods I think I've ever experienced as an adult or as a child, because I didn't know from week to week what was going on, and not being in the community, not being near my own kids or my mom. There were periods there I didn't know if I would see some of my family members, and there are family members who are gone now. It's been a relief. Only recently did I get a doctor here in Merritt, and I was on the list for quite a while. And I've heard the statistics from the NDP, and it's wonderful to hear that there have been 800 doctors hired, and there have been over 4,000 nurses hired, and that there is a new hospital in Kelowna being built to train more healthcare workers, that we need to have more healthcare workers from abroad come into Canada and have less red tape, and that there has to be an incentive provided so that they can come to rural communities like Merritt. I like the plan, but there still needs to be work on that plan, because I want to make sure that once Dr. McLeod retires, who's going to be taking care of his patients?
Yeah, who's gonna take care of his patients? I came back here in 2019. The only doctor that was available was Dr. McLeod, who I have never seen to this day, refuses to see people. Oh, he'll talk to me on the phone and quite readily say, oh, that must be this infection. I'll write you a prescription, without seeing me. Well, we go to the lab maybe and do some tests. The quality of care is unacceptable.
Mm-hmm.
Doctors. Fear, everybody was afraid. Everybody was afraid. Why were we afraid? Because we were told to be. It's all we heard day in and day out, fear-mongering. There's many people died today. They were vaccinated, they were unvaccinated, they were this, they were that. I had a doctor the night before I moved up here. I moved up here in 2019 and I said to her, what do you think of this? I already knew, I've always been a researcher. She said, do your research. I'll even give you websites you can go look at and research, then you make your own mind up. I can't tell you yes or no, that's your decision, and that's true, and I agreed with her. But she was honest enough to say, do your own research. And I think that a lot more of us wanted to go down that rabbit hole, as they call it, to do our own research. I'm glad I did my own research, I say. And I know a lot of other people who have. You know, so this is a very divisive condition that happened. And again, I went to residential school. And I was told by people, oh, is that part of your, you don't trust the government? Well, I really think about it, I guess so. They never had any good intentions for us, our people. I know that's a big one brush stroke. You know, there's of course people I do care. And you can't just say, oh, government was like that. So anyway, that's the medical system. The whole thing needs revamping, I think. Somehow, I don't know how the government works and all that stuff, but our hospital is lacking. Hospitals, probably all through Canada, not just BC.
Yeah, it is something that I'm sure you're hearing it at the door too, Francyne, and everywhere we go.
Yes.
Healthcare, especially in Merritt and Lillooet,
Mm-hmm.
where the ERs are closing at least one night a week. I think Lillooet was closed 3 nights this week. And as a father of a 6-month-old, that's terrifying. In Lillooet, they say you can go to Royal Inland for help. That's 2 hours away in good weather.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's not right. And so I know that doctors spend like 30 to 40% of their time doing administrative stuff. So there has to be ways that we find efficiencies there. Are we able to enable them to spend more time doing things that only doctors can do, and let nurses do more things? Because right now nurses aren't nurses go to school to do a lot of things, and they don't do all of the stuff that they go to school for. And so I think that we can find ways to make that better by hiring or rethinking how we do our administrative staff to help doctors find efficiencies in how they do their work. And also, like, health care isn't just your broken arm or a surgery, it's your health. And I think that we should have a more proactive health care system in this province. If you go to a clinic, you might not need to see a doctor. Maybe you need to see a dietitian or a physiotherapist, or like mental health is a thing too, right? So maybe you need to see a therapist. And one thing that I'm really proud of as a BC Green is to say that we want to make mental health part of the medical services plan, so that if you need to see a psychologist or a therapist, that is covered by your medical services premium. And so I think that we can't just create new doctors, we need to train them, or we need to find somewhere else for them to come from. And people in Alberta and Saskatchewan, they need doctors too. So I don't think it's right that we nab them from those provinces. But if people want to move here from elsewhere, can we rethink, or can we institute something like provisional licenses? I know we used to have them in the province, and that's people can do some of the things that they went to school for in Europe or Africa or wherever they come from, until they get upgraded to the Canadian standard, or until they can prove that they can do all the things that we expect our doctors to do here.
But we don't want to see what the Conservatives are proposing.
Yes. No, thank you.
We don't want just the rich people to be able to afford to get the fastest services from doctors. That's not what Canada is about. That's not what our community is about. So that's one of my concerns, is we need to make sure that everybody has fair and equitable attention from the medical. And so, as you mentioned, you're right, it's sometimes more. We need to have options. If we want to see a dietitian or a naturopath, or see someone those are the options we need to be putting out there for people. I don't think I need to see someone to get prescribed antibiotics all the time. I need someone who can maybe give me acupuncture and alleviate the pain in a different manner, something that I agree with.
And I've utilized those alternatives. They should not be called alternatives. They should be part of this whole system, our choice. And very expensive, very costly if we do it on our own.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to search farther, like Vancouver or Kamloops, or there's not much here in Merritt that I'm aware of or I've found. Like acupuncture I have in Merritt, but yeah, we'd like freedom of choice.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something I want to see too. Is to see more funding for people of all ages, but mostly seniors, to travel to see a doctor, or to see their specialist that they need to go see in Vancouver, because it's very expensive with gas and a hotel, and
If you have a car.
If you have a car, exactly. And so, I want to be able to see people in rural communities go elsewhere to get, because even if, when we open the ER here in Merritt full time, you're not going to have the specialist cancer doctor that maybe lives in Vancouver or Kelowna. But I think that it's important that the government still support you in getting your health care wherever you need to. So, I'm sorry,
Yeah, so going back to nurses and doctors, I know that in the Merritt area and surrounding areas, there are abundance of doctors and nurses. So what is the issue regarding the closures of the hospitals when we have the services there but it's not being utilized? My niece is a nurse. She does not get hired for whatever reasons, but she is qualified, and she's working with a community service. But she's applied with the hospital, and she was rejected. So what are the issues? Why they keep shutting down? And is there a financial issue that is a concern with the doctors and the nurses? Are they not getting paid enough, or, you know, like,
For our
what
riding,
is the problem?
I feel like for the Fraser-Nicola riding, I mean, housing is an issue. Trying to bring doctors into the area and bring their families and have the house they want. Because it seems like sometimes they want this fancy house, you know, like from what they might get in Vancouver, but they're not going to find that in this riding. We offer a different type of lifestyle. We offer a different type of community, you know, so we need to have a certain individual who is willing to learn about our community and enjoy what we have to offer. I think it's more than just money, but I also, when we're hiring people from out of the country, you know, from different countries, there's a cultural barrier. There are people who don't want to come here because of the language barrier. You know, we hear from some of the constituents saying, I don't want to see a doctor that I can't understand. Well, how does that doctor then feel? They're trying to be a doctor, but if you're not willing to also accept someone who's also learning, then that's going to make it difficult overall. So we need ourselves to be more flexible. And in regards to your family member who's a nurse, I don't get that either. I think that's where we need to look at some of these protocols and rules and reassess them to see, are they really what's best for our community? Because if she's already able to work for an organization and provide services to community members in this capacity, I don't know why she wouldn't be able to work in that capacity. So that should be reevaluated, and something's got to be done, because we're in a dreadful situation.
It's really scary for the individuals who are doing the interviews. And I can understand it because of the UNDRIP and like the new residential school thing that's happening. We as First Nation have the attention of the federal, the provincial government, and we also have the attention of the municipal government. And I went away for my career and came back to Merritt to what? To the same thing that I left. There's no changes. I was anticipating that I was going to see and tuck up and see and written all over the place. There's nothing. So I've started knocking on doors and asking the city, why not? What the heck? But I, as a practitioner, like I was a nurse, not a nurse, I was a teacher. I could not work in Merritt because I was born and raised here. And I was told point blank. So it's the good old boys club. That's what it comes down to. That's what the government is all about. I can do all the back scratching, but it's not going to do any good because it's the good old boys club. And so that's probably what your niece is going through. The exact same thing. And you know, people don't want to talk about that, but I don't care. I will talk about it. I mean, I had a good life, so throw me in jail. You know, like, I don't really care.
But we shouldn't be worried about that. And I mean,
And, you know, and people still, if you look at the other side, they don't understand First Nations, and they're scared spitless because they don't understand. They need to know what they need to know. and they don't know who we are.
Mm-hmm.
And they won't step over that line to come and understand. But I do have a question, and the question is about economic development within Merritt, within Merritt. How can we reestablish economic development? Our city is dying. We're losing our sawmills. Merritt was known for sawmills. I used to drive by and I'd open my windows and inhale the scent of the wood. Now I have to go down Colchana Avenue to smell the wood. I should be able to smell it from up on top of the hill, and I don't. We need to deal with stumpage costs. That's because we had a fire, all of that wood could have been processed. But because of stumpage fees, they didn't touch it. So something needs to happen economically.
Oh, I fully agree with that. I mean, I don't know Lillooet quite as well as I know Merritt, but I mean, coming back and seeing Colchana Avenue, you know, and how quiet it was. It used to be such a bustling downtown area. You know, my grandma used to park on the corner of the street there, right outside of Super Value, and just sit there and watch people, and people would come and talk. I thought it was the most boring thing on one hand, but I also you got to meet people, and now you go down the street and it's not the same. But I do feel that there are opportunities that we need to work with community members to do. We need to see young people going into trades and starting their own trades businesses so that they can rebuild the community. We need to see more people going into education or tech and starting their own businesses, because not everybody has to work in Vancouver to have a decent career or business. We can work remotely. We need to have better internet. I mean, we know down at Shackan we don't have great internet, you know, and that's been something that both the federal and the provincial have been trying to work on. And the NDP have a plan to make sure that that is addressed by 2025 to get rid of that digital divide. Tourism, the tourism booth here has been closed for how long? We have to make a decision and move forward. We can't be so scared that we don't make a decision there. I've worked with Community Futures of Central Ontario First Nations for quite a while. There are supports there. We just need to understand that some of these small businesses, they're not going to be making $500,000 a year, but even if you're making enough to cover your costs and have a decent life and set some aside for savings, that's a pretty good business there. I mean, I think there are opportunities we need to consider and we need to support. I think also as community members, we need to support those businesses. So if I need a birthday cake for a family member, I don't think I need to go to Costco and Kamloops to go buy that birthday cake, when I know that someone in the community can bake a birthday cake, decorate the birthday cake, you know, and you're supporting each other. We need to get back to that kind of community. And we were talking about forestry just a little while ago too.
Yeah, and so there's a lot that we have in common, a lot that our parties have in common, and I mean, if you watch the debate, you would hear David Eby, like, a lot of times I agree with Sonia on that, and so there are a lot of things that we agree on, and absolutely, we need more young people in trades. We need more people in trades, not just young people. And you know, it's fantastic. Like, we are at NVIT here, and this institute is a fantastic place.
Mm-hmm.
Merritt is very lucky and fortunate, and to have an institute of higher learning, I think that's amazing. And places like this can then become centers of learning. I was amazed last year when I found that NVIT offers Indigenous language courses in Statlium, Statliamich, and the Captain, and in Silchin. I think those are fantastic, and part of attracting people to our communities to open businesses is having institutes like NVIT, but also things for them to do here, and like carrots to bring them to our communities. So we need to have affordable housing, and we need to have the type of housing that they like. Not everyone wants to live in an apartment, and not everyone needs to have a 5-bedroom monstrosity, McMansion. So we need to be ensuring that we have the right kinds of things for people to move here. And something I've mentioned a lot is also ensuring that we are working with the First Nations communities around, because Merritt and Lillooet, where I'm from, the First Nations communities are some of the main drivers of economic activity in our riding, and ensuring that those communities have the abilities to make decisions. And you mentioned harvesting black timber, burned wood, ensuring that those activities are happening in a good way, and making sure that those relationships between forest licensees and First Nations who have licenses to cut and First Nations that don't, making sure that those relationships are good and positive. Because I hear a lot of, we need to free the permits, and how do we?
For you.
Yeah.
We just talked about education.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've been working on for ever since I came back to the valley is, and I've been working with SFU, UBC, UVic, Okanagan, and up north. I've been trying to push for the provincial, that would be you guys, and the federal government to embrace entry-level university and pay for the tab for the First Nations studies or language in that community. And if the province picks up that tab, more people will take it. If more people take it, all those doctors and lawyers and all those people who are going into whatever profession they're going to go into, they will have a flavor of First Nations. Because you go into overweight or save on food, that's a business. Now, I know Sean quite well, and I've been sort of really pushing my First Nations on him. He had to go for business administration so that he could have a business called Save on Food. I go down to the police detachment, and I've gotten my foot in the door there, and so I started incorporating the Nhlaka'pamux flavor into the detachment. I haven't quite gotten my foot in the city of Merritt, because that's kind of like the good old boys club, but I will keep working on them. But what I'm trying to say is all of these businesses need to have some First Nations flavor in their education. So I would like to hear you guys have that in your discussion when you become whoever the successor is. I would like to see that, and I will come back and ask you. I promise.
Good.
I believe that.
Yeah, I do think that just like English is a requirement for university, I think a First Nations course should also be included in that. My mother just last year started going back for her bachelor's degree. She didn't get one when she was 19. She had me instead. So a different kind of future. But she's going back, and she was going back for psychology. She'd always wanted to have a degree in psychology. And then she, at the University of Northern British Columbia, where she's going in Prince George, she had to take a First Nations class. And she loved it so much that she is now doing a double major in it, because it opened her eyes to that way of seeing the world and all the troubles that, the government, the Crown, has forced on Indigenous peoples. And so I think if we expose more people to Antholocatum and other First Nations ways of knowing and experiencing the world, I think we wouldn't have as much racism as we do in this province.
And I have such respect for you, Jonah, because you understand the community. But what frustrates me sometimes is that I've sat at tables across from politicians, and they ask me for my input about something, but they want a pan-Indigenous input from me. And I have to be clear telling them, I can't tell them what an Indigenous person or Indigenous woman in Iqaluit experiences. I can't tell them what a Métis woman from the prairies experiences. I can't tell them what a Maliseet person. But if you ask me something about the Nklakapun people, I can give you my opinion there. And I think whenever we have people going out there to represent us as a community members, they do need to have some sort of sign off that they've taken at least some history about the local people. And I am concerned, when we have representatives, because it sounds like the current city government, could do with some training. And from what I'm gathering from other parties, they could probably do with taking some training to understand where we're coming from.
I wrote a story about a turtle and a hare race, and they raced over these knolls. And the rabbit said, I will beat you. The turtle says, well, let's have a race. So he got his family together. The next morning they had their race. Rabbit said, I will give you a head start. So turtle started going. Rabbit kind of sat back and waited and then started to run. Just over the knoll, a turtle was going over. He said, what? How did that happen? So he ran over got to almost the next knoll, and the turtle was going over the next knoll. He says, I'll get that rabbit this time. So he got to the third knoll, and the turtle was going over the knoll. He started getting almost to the finish line, and the turtle was crossing the finish line. The punchline to this is, I had my family help me. You see, we all look alike. And you know what? That's what City Hall is seeing. They see us as all looking alike. Mm-hmm. They don't understand that we have different customs, different traditions. They see us as one. We need to get rid of that through education.
Mm-hmm. And we have such a great opportunity in this riding. I think everybody with the different First Nations, the different communities. And I say that just because I was at the Sikh community on Sunday. That was my first time I'd ever been there, even though I have lived in Merritt for so long. I was afraid to go to the Sikh temple, especially by myself. But on Sunday morning, I woke up and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to the Sikh temple. I got up, got dressed, went to the temple. Actually, I stopped off at A&W first. Spoke to some friends at A&W who were having coffee. I'm like, have you ever been? And they're like, no. Went to the Sikh temple, got to the doors, and got butterflies. And then there was a couple in the parking lot. And I just approached them. I'm like, this is my first time, and I don't know what your protocols are. Come with us. They were so friendly. got in there, understood you could wash your hands. If you go upstairs, you take off your shoes here, put on this head covering there, go downstairs, here's some food, it's all free, talk to. It was one of the best mornings I've had during this campaign. It was really nice. And I vow that won't be my last time going to the Sikh temple now. And I'm going to start bringing people, so I might go to A&W and start, okay, let's go, you know. So we need to have changes happening. It can't be the old boys club continuing on.
I have 2.5 questions for you. So earlier, Francine, you mentioned the NDP has a plan to bridge the digital divide. What is that plan?
So the plan basically is we need to put more investments. We need to make sure that the technology is being put forth to go right ahead. Go ahead to ensure that all of our communities are being offered consistent and fast internet. It can't be just, the urban communities. It needs to be across the Cook's Gem. It can't be just, certain centers, because it's with the internet, that all of our community members are going to be able to access not just entertainment like Netflix, but the books and the learning and just interacting with each other.
Mm-hmm. And my half question is the same question, but to Jonah. Does your party have a plan to bridge the digital divide? If not, what would you do?
I don't know of anything in our platform that talks specifically about the digital divide or providing connectivity for internet services, but one thing that the Greens do talk a lot about is equity between urban and rural communities. And so I do see absolutely that would play into a BC Green government, is ensuring that rural and remote communities have the same level of services, talking internet and basic infrastructure, because right now internet is basic infrastructure, to ensure that rural and remote and First Nations communities are all connected to adequate levels of internet to allow them to take part in the 21st century economy.
And my second question, so for some context, I grew up in Vancouver, and moving here, living here for almost a year now, one of the biggest things I've noticed is there's a cultural disconnect between urban and rural living that is much bigger than any cultural heritage color divide. It really ultimately seems to come down to urban versus rural. When you guys are elected and you guys are in Victoria, where Victoria itself, it is an urban center, and a lot of the more heavy hitters there are representing urban areas, how will you not just represent well your riding, but bridge that gap and make them not just hear your problems here and what you're representing, but have them truly understand and maybe bring back some of their perspective to your own ridings? How will you bridge that divide?
I think having the support of the community is one of the biggest assets you have as a rural representative, because you know each other. As I mentioned earlier, I've already reached out to the BC Cattlemen's Association. We're reaching out to schools, we're reaching out to municipalities. And when those, and not to mention, the unions have been reaching out and being very supportive. So having that consistent relationship, if something comes up and I feel, I'm raising something, I have to remember I'm not alone. And, I think urban centers need to understand that, yeah, they're part of an urban center, but do they know their community? Do they know who they can contact? Even just for a hand up. I mean, even like today here, it probably takes like 15, 20 minutes. You know what? If I needed to go grab some snacks, I can contact Kukuli Cafe within, and I know the owner would have something ready by the time I got down there. Just those kind of supports. And I need to let urban centers understand that we might be the country mouse, but we're a pretty strong country mouse. And without us, they wouldn't have a lot of what they have, be it, some of the resources, the food, the water. We are just as important, if not even more important, because that's what British Columbia was based on.
Yeah.
Or their playground, that's how I see it. In terms of, they come here with their big trailers and their motorbikes and, they get away for the weekend and go to the lakes and go to our mountains and all that. And I feel it saddens me when I see that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like I've been living that urban-rural divide my whole life. I was born on Salt Spring, grew up in Clearwater, small town, went to school in Victoria, met a lot of great urban folk there who, and it was strange for me growing up in the interior. I guess not that strange, I guess, because we have the same kind of bias. Anything after Hope is Vancouver, and for them, it's anything past Hope is Alberta. They don't really know we're up here, right? And so, bridging that gap is absolutely critical to ensuring that towns like Lytton are getting the supports they need, and ensuring that. I mean, Merritt was also impacted by it in that year with the atmospheric river, and just seeing the differences in how Chilliwack and Abbotsford was supported after that, and Merritt and Lytton. It almost looks like it's two different worlds, and so I think that this riding and all rural ridings really need a strong advocate for them in Victoria, and someone loud and who can get things done by bridging those gaps. Because, again, as a Green, I acknowledge Greens have historically been a smaller party within the legislature, but we've also been very mighty. We've been able to get through a lot of things here, and I have often said that when people elect BC Greens, they get a lot of bang for their buck. BC Greens show up. We put forward solutions, and we are always community focused. And I think that's why, in BC at least, a BC Green has never lost a re-election before. When people elect Greens, they keep them around because there are those very tangible solutions for the community that people can feel in their lives. And I think that's absolutely important. You can't be a timid mouse for a rural riding, because you're not going to get reelected.
Not in politics.
No. You need to be able to go to ranchers, and you need to go to First Nations and show them this is how I've made things better in the riding, because people don't put up with that kind of thing in rural ridings, and and it is, like Francine said, it's fantastic being able to, when I was working on the Big Bar landslide emergency, to just call up the owner of the winery and say, hey, the Premier Horgan is coming to town. Can we do something? And he'll be here in half an hour. And the winery owner's, oh, yeah, of course. Premier? For sure. We can do anything for Premier Horgan. And, you might not get those kinds of services in the city, right? That, oh, no, we're busy. Go somewhere else. And our riding is simultaneously the center of the province, because everyone drives through our riding to get either to the coast or to the interior, but also it's out of the way at the same time, especially for the communities in the Fraser Canyon and Lillooet, and I feel people know that. And so when we have dignitaries, premiers, party leaders come to our riding, it means a lot for us. And I think that's something really important that I, in my personal life, try to get my coworkers who live in Kamloops and down in Victoria, come to Lillooet, come to the riding, and I'll show you the amazing things and why people love living in this riding. And that's really important. And that's, I was so close to getting Elizabeth May to come to Lytton a few weeks ago, and then her husband got COVID. But that's really important, is to bring those people to the riding, to show them how can we improve things, and why haven't things moved forward in communities like Lytton and Merritt? Because
And Spence's Bridge.
And Spence's Bridge.
That used to be not a huge, but it was a hub. And now there's nothing.
There's one coffee shop and The
It's
band
tricky
office.
sometimes.
Yeah. No, we shouldn't be getting the attention from the urban centers, from the capital, just because there's an emergency and the
No.
trucks can't come through
Exactly.
our highways. We need to be given the same attention all the time. We're still taxpayers here. Without our fruits and vegetables, without our wine, without our tourism and our scenery and our beef, we can do without the urban centers. They can't do without us.
So how will you guys put Merritt on the map, so to say? Or, Fraser-Nicola riding.
I think sometimes sharing that, because I know I've learned a lot going down to the lower part of the riding. That's been a concern that has come up, is how are we going to represent, the Agassiz, the Harrison, the DeRoche areas. And there's been a lot of visits there, and if elected, there will be a lot more visits there. And we need to understand, that the illegal dumping that's happening in parts of those agricultural areas, they need to be stopped. They need to have accountability to the perpetrators of that, because it's affecting your food, it's affecting our water, it's affecting our air. So sometimes it's just being practical. And I think our government overall has a lot of practical people. I don't want to see continued career politicians in place. We need to make sure that the people's needs as we are going into the next century are being addressed now. Otherwise, what are we passing on to our kids?
Yeah, and I think it's also really important to show up in Victoria. That's having a presence, whether it be on any of the various committees the successful candidate will be on, or just putting forward solutions in the legislature. That's something that concerns me about the other party that isn't here, is that they, in the spring, their elected officials weren't coming to the legislature. They just weren't showing up to debates. And I don't see how somebody can have an impact and put Merritt or Fraser-Nicola on the map if they're not even in the room. And I think that's an important piece in having a presence, being confident in what you know, and also making sure you're talking to your constituents and going to the communities so that you can say, I spoke to so-and-so in Spence's Bridge, and they told me this story. Stories have a lot of impact, and more so than rattling off numbers, I think our politicians and our parties are going to be swayed more by stories than saying, oh yeah, I heard, right? It's, no, this person told me this, and that's why I'm here telling you that this needs to change.
My last two quick questions for you. What would you guys like to say to the Fraser-Nicola riding?
You go first, go ahead.
Okay. I think what I would say to the Fraser-Nicola riding is that we have been through a lot in the last 4 years. We've had fires, we've had floods, we've had inaction on healthcare emergencies, and what I like about the Greens is we're giving voters something to vote for, not against. And that's the kind of future, the future of hope, the future of looking forward, the future of working together that comes from voting for BC Greens. The Greens aren't afraid to work across party lines to get things done for our communities. I'm not afraid to work with the NDP or the Conservatives to ensure that the needs of Fraser-Nicola are being met and that we are being heard in Victoria and throughout the province, because communities elsewhere are going to see what good legislation is and what good representation looks like from our elected official, whoever that may be. Mm-hmm. And we need parties that are not tied to ideology and that are looking for solutions for our communities, because solutions are going to make our lives better. Ideology without action is not. And the Greens have done it before. In 2017, we helped the NDP form government, and we saw some really amazing pieces of legislation come through there. We saw electoral reform, we saw some really excellent climate policy, and that's what I'm asking voters to consider here again, is to keep the NDP or the Conservatives to a minority by electing more Greens?
I think similarly to Jonah, I think for the Fraser-Nicola, it's so important for us to work together from each of our communities, each of our families. And with the change in the boundaries, of course, now we need to make sure we're very much inclusive of the southern part of our riding. But we can do that. And I've been part of this community majority of my life, and I want to come back to a community that understands that we can do so much if we work together. Other parties, they have some ideas, and they're not great. They're not all bad ideas, but some of their ideas are a little bit pie in the sky. So it's very important for the voters in the Fraser-Nicola to do their research. Don't just listen to social media. Don't just listen to commercials on TV. Really do your own due diligence and find out what is being proposed by that individual. What are their plans for Fraser-Nicola? Because this area of ours has such history, such strong people, and so whoever you want to represent you, that's a decision that's going to be lasting for the next 3 or 4 years. And as a former HR person, I look at the past history, and for the NDP, going through COVID was really hard. But watching what happened in BC when I was in Ontario, the NDP was working with Bonnie Henry. They had a plan. Their economy and their healthcare did quite well compared to a lot of other areas. Now let's continue on that path forward, but let's do it together so we can make it better.
And my last question for you guys, I like to end all of my this isn't so much an interview, but what is a fun fact about yourselves? Independent of politics or party, just any fun fact about yourself.
Oh gosh. Fun fact.
My go-to fun fact for me is I love musicals.
What's your favorite musical?
Hamilton.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I listen to the soundtrack. That's how I get myself pumped up before these things.
Oh my goodness. Okay, I guess my fun fact is that I have never taken the opportunity to oh, no, I don't like that fun fact. That's just a little too much there. My fun fact is some people, they can curl their tongue. I can't do it. All my family members, my daughter, my son, and my husband, they can curl their tongue and they mock me because I can't curl my tongue.